Welcome to Territorial Behaviors,
an interactive U.S. history tutorial for students like you.
You probably know that there are places around the world, like Puerto Rico, that are part of the United States but aren't one of the United States. Maybe you've wondered how faraway places like Alaska and Hawaii, which aren't connected to the rest of the country, ever became part of the USA. This tutorial will teach you about the different territories of the United States, past and present. You'll review the difference between states and territories and how territories become states. Then you'll learn about the different territories the U.S. has acquired in its history, including those like Hawaii and Alaska, which became states, and those like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which haven't yet. You'll learn the history behind each territory and learn how it became part of the U.S. Finally, you'll learn about the history behind the construction of the Panama Canal, which resulted in the existence of a unique U.S. territory, the Panama Canal Zone. Let's start by reviewing some basics about U.S. territories and how they operate. When the United States was founded in 1776, there were only 13 original states. That didn't last long, though. By the 1850s, a series of territorial acquisitions expanded the size of the nation to the borders familiar to Americans today. The rest of the 50 states, with 2 exceptions, were created out of these territories. With a few unusual exceptions, like Texas and California, almost all states after the original 13 started as territories first, before achieving full statehood. Territories have their own governments, and those who live in territories are considered Americans. But the governments and citizens of territories don't have all the rights and powers possessed by the states. To put it simply, states are part of the union that is the United States, while territories belong to the union. For a territory to become a state, several important steps must occur. First, the citizens of the territory must petition or ask the U.S. Congress to be considered for statehood. Second, Congress must vote to consider the territory's petition and allow it to frame a constitution. Next, the people of the territory must create and vote to approve a proposed constitution for their new state. Then, Congress approves the constitution and passes an act of admission. Finally, the president signs the act, officially creating the new state. The first territory to be added to the United States outside its contiguous or connected borders was the vast northern territory of Alaska. Until the 1860s, the Russian Empire had claimed Alaska as its property, but Russia became interested in selling its faraway territory. In 1867, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward negotiated the purchase from Russia for the then gigantic sum of $7.2 million. Many Americans at the time thought the purchase was a foolish waste of money. They called the Alaskan Territory Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. But history has proven the Alaska purchase to be a bargain. Without war, the U.S. gained vast lands that proved to contain oil and gold, removed an imperial rival from North America, and gained access to key ports in the Pacific. So few Americans moved to Alaska that it was not officially incorporated as a territory until 1912. Decades later, Congress passed legislation allowing for Alaskan statehood, and the last frontier became the 49th state in 1959. The story of Hawaii is particularly interesting and complex. The Hawaiian Islands were their own independent nation, a united kingdom, since 1795. It was a monarchy, ruled over by Hawaiian kings and queens. In the 1800s, many Americans settled in Hawaii. Some were missionaries who wanted to convert native Hawaiians to Christianity. Others were businessmen who came to Hawaii to be planters and make their fortunes. Sugar was Hawaii's most valuable export. In 1875, Hawaii became even closer to the U.S. when it signed a trade deal allowing it to export sugar there duty-free or without paying taxes. In exchange, Hawaii promised not to give or lease any of its territory to another world power, tightening its bond with the United States. Business boomed, and the Americans who lived in Hawaii became an even more important part of the kingdom's economy and government. Americans also gained the important right to use Pearl Harbor as a refueling station for its ships crossing the Pacific. But in 1890, the American government changed the deal. All nations that exported sugar to the U.S. were given the same duty-free deal that Hawaii had enjoyed. This made Hawaiian sugar less valuable and sparked an economic crisis on the islands. The crisis in Hawaii had political consequences. Many Hawaiians now developed a growing anger towards the American elite who controlled so much of their country. In 1891, Hawaii's queen, Lili'oukalani, tried to eliminate Americans' control of her government. In response, the American population revolted and seized power. The queen was deposed or removed as Hawaii's leader. U.S. Marines were sent in from overseas to support this overthrow of the Hawaiian government. The Americans now in charge asked that Hawaii be annexed or officially made a part of the United States. But the president at that time, Democrat Grover Cleveland, believed the Americans in Hawaii had acted improperly and refused. He wanted to restore the queen to power, but the American-led government remained in place. Hawaii would have to wait several more years to be annexed when a new president, Republican William McKinley, took office. McKinley was eager for annexation. "We need Hawaii," said McKinley, "just as much and a good deal more than we needed California. It is manifest destiny." President McKinley made sure that Hawaii was annexed in 1898, officially becoming a territory of the United States. Hawaii remained a territory for more than 60 years but became the 50th state in 1959. 3 other territories became part of the United States in the last 2 years of the 19th century. This is sometimes called the Age of American Imperialism, when the U.S. developed a strong interest in adding overseas possessions to its own empire. In 1898, the U.S. defeated Spain in a short war and gained almost all of Spain's empire as a result. Another tutorial covers this Spanish-American War and American imperialism in depth. The treaty that ended the war gave the U.S. control of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean and Guam in the Pacific. Both islands became permanent American territories, and the people who lived there are United States citizens today. Puerto Rico is a commonwealth with a population of about 3.5 million, making it by far the most populous territory in the U.S. More Americans live in Puerto Rico, for example, than live in Alaska and Hawaii combined. It probably won't happen soon, but if there is ever to be a 51st state, it will probably be Puerto Rico. Time will tell whether or not it will follow the path of Alaska and Hawaii or choose to remain a territory. The islands of American Samoa became a territory 1 year later in 1899, although they were not a Spanish territory and had nothing to do with the war. The Samoan Islands, like Hawaii, were strategically located in the Pacific Ocean with a major harbor for a potential Navy base. Germany, Great Britain, and the United States all signed treaties with Samoa and tried to dominate the islands. This rivalry almost led to a naval battle between German and American ships. Britain gave up its claim, and in 1899, Germany and the U.S. agreed to split the islands into 2 parts. The eastern islands, American Samoa, became a U.S. territory. Unlike all the other inhabited territories, people who live in American Samoa today do not possess full American citizenship. Instead, they are American nationals, residents of the United States who are not full citizens. 2 more island territories became U.S. possessions later as a result of World Wars I and II. What are today the U.S. Virgin Islands had belonged to Denmark since the 1600s. The U.S. had long been interested in buying the islands, but a deal wasn't finalized until 1917. During World War I, Americans were concerned that Germany might seize the islands and use them as a submarine base. In 1917, the U.S. officially purchased the islands from Denmark for $25 million, making them a new U.S. territory. The Northern Mariana Islands, 15 Pacific islands just north of Guam, became an American possession after the United States invaded them and took them from the Japanese in 1944 during World War II. Before being Japanese, the Mariana Islands had been controlled by Germany and Spain. The U.S. was given responsibility for the islands by the United Nations after the war, but they did not officially become a territory until 1978. Citizens of both these territories, the U.S. Virgin Islands and the Northern Mariana Islands, are full citizens of the United States. The United States became more involved in the Caribbean than ever before after the Spanish-American War, starting with the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt. In this region, one issue overshadowed all others: the building of the Panama Canal. The creation of a canal somewhere in Central America to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had long been a dream of people everywhere. Before the construction of a canal, ships that wanted to travel from one side of the United States to the other had to make an extremely long journey around Cape Horn, at the very tip of South America. A canal would make global trade faster and cheaper, but it would help the U.S. in another way. The United States was a major world power with a growing navy. Without a canal, the U.S. almost had to maintain two separate naval fleets, one in the Atlantic and one in the Pacific. With a canal, the Navy would be able to move its ships back and forth where they were needed, quickly. The U.S. proved to be the key nation in the construction of the Panama Canal. Americans would pay for the canal, supervise its construction, and control the canal for most of the 20th century. Where to build the canal that would connect the ocean? Originally, some thought that Nicaragua would be the cheapest and easiest place to build a canal. But focus soon shifted to the Isthmus of Panama, the narrowest strip of land in Central America. In fact, a French company had started construction of a Panama Canal in the 1880s, then abandoned the project because it proved too expensive and dangerous. To proceed with its own canal attempt, the U.S. first had to pay the French company for the rights to build there. Before 1903, Panama was not its own country. It was the northern province of Colombia, its present-day neighbor to the southeast. So the U.S. government began negotiations with Colombia. Americans wanted to control a canal zone 6 miles wide with a canal at its center. For control of this zone, the U.S. offered Colombia $10 million up front and $250,000 each year to lease the land. The U.S. Senate approved the treaty, but Colombia's Senate did not. They wanted more money, $25 million. President Roosevelt became angry when he heard of this. He decided that instead of dealing with the Colombian government, the U.S. would support rebels in Panama who wanted independence from Colombia. While Panamanians staged a small revolution and declared their independence, U.S. warships blocked the sea route so that Colombia could not interfere. Roosevelt acknowledged the independence of Panama in 1903 and signed a treaty for the same $10 million deal that he had originally offered Colombia, but for a larger canal zone 10 miles wide. The president was proud of the forceful action he had taken. "I took the canal zone and let Congress debate," he said, "and while the debate goes on, the canal does also." Unsurprisingly, the Colombian government was upset about America's role in the loss of its territory. The U.S. did eventually pay Colombia the $25 million it had asked for, but not until 1921. In 1904, Congress created a commission to begin construction on the Panama Canal. Construction took 10 years from 1904 to 1914. The commission in charge needed to recruit thousands of workers from the U.S. and other places and needed to provide safe conditions for them to work and live. This was no easy task. Mosquito-borne tropical diseases like yellow fever and malaria were deadly threats to those who worked on the canal. Even with solutions like fumigation and mosquito netting, more than 5,000 workers died of disease and accidents. The Panama Canal was not built at sea level, but with a series of locks and dams that raises and lowers ships 48 miles across the Isthmus of Panama. Workers even had to cut through a mountain range. Technologies designed in the United States to build the canal included steam shovels, power drills, cement mixers, and rock crushers. Especially for its time, the Panama Canal was an engineering marvel. By the time the canal was completed in 1914, the U.S. had spent about $375 million on its construction. Today, this would be the equivalent of over $8 billion. From 1903 to 1979, the Panama Canal Zone was considered an unorganized territory of the United States. This meant that it didn't really have its own government, and the U.S. Constitution only partially applied there. Americans who lived there worked for the government or for the company that ran the canal. The original agreement made with Panama's government placed no time limit on the U.S. lease of the canal zone. Eventually, however, American control of the canal became very unpopular in Panama and damaged relationships between the two nations. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter negotiated a new treaty with Panama. When it took effect 2 years later, Panama and the United States held joint control over the canal and the surrounding territory, and the canal zone officially ceased to exist. On December 31, 1999, the canal was officially turned over to Panama, which controls it today. Many thousands of ships pass through the Panama Canal each year, and it remains vital to global trade today. Along with the Golden Gate Bridge and the Empire State Building, the canal has been called one of the 7 wonders of the modern world.